Tech journalism is corrupt, it is dirty, and it is in the pocket of big tech. And there are many problems with technology journalism, from political bias to personal bias and on and on and on. But the reality is, for many, many years, the entire industry of tech journalism has been so fundamentally corrupt and dirty that it kind of almost doesn't matter. It is an absolutely corrupted system. I started thinking about this again after I saw a post on X from Sandy Peterson. Now, Sandy Peterson is a longtime game industry veteran, worked on Doom and Quake and Doom 2 and Age of Empires. Sandy Peterson has worked on a ton of huge game titles over the years. And he made the following post, and I'm going to read it to you now. He says, when I worked at Microprose, again, he's been at a lot of amazing companies, friggin' Microprose, man. Game reviewers openly asked for bribes to review our games, as in they'd call up our marketing vice president and tell him they'd review it, but only if we flew them into town and wined and dined them, or if we paid $1,000 fee to, quote, move our review to the front of the line, end quote. It does happen a lot. When I worked at Ensemble Studios, Age of Empires, reviewers were a bit less crass. Instead, they'd call from magazines and say stuff like, we're considering a big review of Age of Mythology in the August issue. How big of an ad spread would you want for that? Right? Strongly implying that buying ads in their magazine would get that review, but not outright committing a felony. Nowadays, I only trust independent reviewers, people like Sophia Narwitz, Josh Strife Hayes, and Mandalore Gaming. Organizations with big websites and dozens of employees are just all liars. The truth is not in them. They'll play a game for 10 minutes and then base their review on what they read on the back of the box. That's all very true. But it started getting me thinking about tech industry in general, because this isn't just a problem in video games. This is a problem across all of tech journalism. When you read the vast majority of tech news sites, and I'm going to go out of my way to try really hard to not name them right now, because I don't want to make this about any one specific site. This is really an industry-wide problem. But when you think about all of them, you realize how absolutely pervasive the corruption is. So I'm going to read something I wrote on X as a follow-up to this. The whole tech journalism industry is incredibly corrupt. Payola, paying for influence, coverage is incredibly common. Just to give you guys a little payola background for those of you who don't know what that is. The idea is this. On the radio, mostly this is a radio thing, payola was, a record company or a publisher going to a radio station and paying them to play songs and push specific songs and bands and albums on the air, right? And so it was kind of payola schemes. Like you'd prop up and make it seem like songs were more popular than maybe they necessarily were, because the DJs were actually getting kickbacks. They were getting actual cash, sometimes literally cash in bags and briefcases, from the record companies in order to make things appear popular. This was a regular thing. And so payola kind of became known for any time you kind of are under the table sliding in money or goods or something in exchange for influence, right? I continue. Ad buys are closely tied to good reviews. In fact, many articles are directly paid for by companies pushing a product or narrative. If you look through all of the largest, or at least they claim to be the largest, tech publishers, tech news publishers that are out there, publishing articles, as well as many on YouTube and the like, a lot of times behind the scenes, those stories, that coverage, not just the reviews, but the actual stories, were paid for in part or in whole by big tech companies looking to not just push a particular product, but to push a particular narrative that helped them in some way, or just simply to buy influence with that tech news outlet or tech journalist in order to influence future product reviews. It's incredibly common. And it's amazing how many articles and even shows are really just scripts and talking points handed down by the big tech companies, along with money attached somehow. Ad buys are an incredibly common one, in order to say, well, take this and turn it into an article. It happens all the time. It happens every day. It's common, constant and common. And if you took those unethical payola practices away, most tech news publications would go out of business overnight. And this isn't an exaggeration. Most tech news publications are barely hanging on financially. They're just not pulling in enough to sock a bunch of money away for a rainy day. I mean, they're barely hanging on by a thread. And that's with taking in a lot of money from these corporations. And a big thing with that is that realistically, their actual reach is significantly smaller than they want to let on to the general public. Like if you look at Wired and so many other publications, the reality is they're not getting the views, and you can see this on social media. They're not getting the views and the reactions and the interactions from people that they kind of claim that they're getting, or they kind of pretend to be getting, which means they can't earn a whole lot of money from your traditional just advertising mechanisms. You really need payola schemes. You need big tech companies to come in and specifically sponsor you regardless of how many views you get. You need companies to come in and say, yeah, I will pay you to write a good article about whatever business practice we are doing here. But it doesn't just end there. It gets really, really dirty. Let's talk about the whining and dining for a moment. It is crazy how much this goes on. When I worked in marketing at software companies, and again, many of you know some of my background and history. I've worked in marketing as well as at marketing executives at big software companies. When I was working in marketing, we would take journalists out on the equivalent of dates. It's really what we did. I mean, nice dates. Dates that were crazy over the top, right? Fancy restaurants, not just we're not talking about going to Waffle House here. We're talking about, the fanciest, most expensive steak dinners, really highly priced bottles of wine, like high price bottles of wine, not, oh, I'll have a glass of your house red, please. No, no, no. It was like, well, you go into the cellar and find a 1492 bottle of blah, 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 and pour that into the thing, even though it costs a friggin' $600 regularly. Regularly, we'd take journalists go-kart driving, indoor skydiving, just on and on. Day-long cruises. We'd go on these fancy cruises where everyone would get dressed up and go on these day cruises on up rivers and crazy events. Basically, hold balls for these people. We would pay for their stays at fancy hotels. We would give them hardware. Sometimes it wouldn't even necessarily be related to what we do. We'd give them phones and tablets and laptops and all sorts of stuff. Other gifts, gift baskets, literally gift baskets. It was crazy. And we kept spreadsheets. And here's the thing. This happens across all of big tech. Every major big tech company does this. I don't know of one who doesn't. We kept spreadsheets of tech journalists detailing who we had in our pocket, how much we'd spend on them, who was the main point person, who had befriended them. That was a really common thing, is big tech companies use PR and marketing people and executives and whatnot to try and become friends with a particular tech journalist in order to be their point person, to give them things and talk to them and oh yeah, buddy, and they make them feel really good and they manipulate the heck out of them. But it's really a mutual manipulation thing, because the tech journalists, they know they're doing it, and the big tech companies, they know what they're doing. Everyone knows that it's a dirty, corrupt system. Everyone's buying each other off, and they know it. They all know it. And here's the thing, as I'm saying all this, undoubtedly there's podcasters and YouTubers and tech journalists and writers who are going, I've never seen any of this. Well, then you're not successful. I'm sorry to say this. If you're a professional tech journalist and you've been doing this for a couple of years and you have a significant audience size, this happens to you. Guaranteed it happens to you. And uh, I have my own personal backed up spreadsheets of all the tech journalists that were in the pockets of tech companies I worked for and other tech companies where me and other marketing and PR people behind the scenes would kind of talk to each other about the tech journalists we were working with. It was crazy corrupt. It was dirty as heck. I hated it. Hated it. It was awful. I was on the receiving end of both sides of this because I was a tech journalist for years. I wrote for Network World and Linux Journal and a bunch of other magazines, and I was writing articles all over the place. These companies would fly me out, put me in the nicest rooms at swank hotels. They would feed me great. Man, did I eat good. I never ate so good as when I was going to see a tech company. They fed me great. They tried to get me liquored up. They tried everything they could to make me happy. They'd take me out on dates. Again, go-kart riding, mini golf, indoor skydiving, boat cruises. It was nuts, the stuff that they'd take you on. And the gifts they'd give you were lavish. Now, tech journalists, by and large, don't earn a ton of money. So these gifts mean a lot, right? So the tech journalists themselves work for the tech news outlet and makes just enough to get by. But then you get all these extra goodies. You don't ever have to, as a tech journalist, if you're pro, you never have to buy your own computers. The laptops just come to you. I remember when Google released their Google Pixel laptop, their fancy Chromebook, their high end one that was like a $2,000 laptop. I remember that just showed up in the mail one day. Just showed up. Oh, great. Now I have a brand new fancy pants laptop. So, as a tech journalist, you come to end up counting on that, relying on that, and you don't want to sour the reputation with those companies because then those things stop coming. Right? You keep them happy. You keep them on the hook. That's the tech journalists play that game, and the tech companies play that game too, and the tech publishers play the game with everyone. Everyone knows what's going on. The tech companies, the big tech companies need this relationship in order for people to talk positively about the stories they want out there. The tech publishers, they keep it going because this relationship allows them to stay in business. Otherwise, they're out of business. They don't have enough coming in otherwise to make this work out. And then the tech journalists, they rely on it because, well, they get all the goodies and they're getting wined and dined and they have a job. It's all crazy dirty. And it's absolutely fundamentally ridiculous. So it's difficult to know who to trust regularly when you're talking about tech journalism, not just reviews, but when you're getting into what news is actually getting covered. Because when you go to the major tech news sites, you'll occasionally come across a bit of real journalism, right? Even the most corrupt tech news outlets will publish a bit of real tech news journalism from time to time. And they will occasionally publish a bit of criticism of the companies that are giving them money and keeping them afloat from time to time. And that keeps up the air, that keeps up the illusion of them truly being impartial, them being truly independent, even though they're really not. A really interesting example of this is when you look at corporations like Mozilla, right? Mozilla with Firefox and whatnot, the way they've handled their finances, their political ideologies, the money they spend on politics, it gets pretty friggin' dirty. At the very least, it's very newsworthy, and there's a lot of stories relating to Mozilla's finances and whatnot to be told, and yet they tend not to tell them. So what'll happen is if there's 10 stories for Mozilla to be told, they'll ignore all of them for as long as they can, right? Until someone forces their hand, right? Some independent media like the Lunduke Journal or someone else comes along and is telling those stories, and those stories start gaining a ton of traction. Then the mainstream news outlets that are in the pocket of Mozilla and Mozilla's close friends, right? The companies that they do business with, they will turn around and write a critical story about Mozilla, but they will only cover one of the maybe 10 aspects to the story, the one that's the least damning, the one that will get that will run the least risk of souring the reputation between the publisher, the journalist, and the topic of the story itself. But then they can point to it and say, see, I'm totally critical of Mozilla. Oh, we wrote hard hitting journalistic pieces against Mozilla. But did they? No, they did the bare minimum of what they had to do to stay in business. The same has happened with IBM and Microsoft and Apple and on and on and on. And you can really start to see a distinct pattern with that. So while many of these news outlets are extraordinarily politically biased, and that without a doubt has a massive impact on what they cover and how they cover those stories. What you also see is, regardless of the politics, regardless of political affiliation or other biases that the individual tech journalists or news outlets may have, the fundamental corruption of the entire tech news and journalism industry is so extreme, is so dirty, is so just fundamentally corrupt. They're in the pocket of big tech to such an extraordinarily just mind blowing degree that it's almost irrelevant. And it's a constant and ongoing thing. And here's the thing: it's not fixable. I'm not here to tell you that here's solutions to that. No, it's not fixable. Not fixable with the same business practices that are currently out there. These tech news outlets, they do not have the ability, the flexibility, the nimbleness to quickly change their entire business strategy in order to decouple themselves from big tech. They don't have that. They've got too many employees. They've got too big of an infrastructure. They've got some debt. They've got a lot of things. They simply can't do that, and so they're stuck, or at least they feel stuck. There's no convincing them at this point. And I think most of you can think in your heads of several of the big, large tech news outlets that are out there, and start to think through them and start to think through their stories, and you can start to see where these problems really show up. We've started to look at, over the last few years, the increasing usage of AI to write the articles. But really, that's not the fundamental problem, because what a lot of these, as much as that's a problem, but because what a lot of these tech news outlets are facing is they need to put out articles and other types of content that is going to make their advertisers happy. IBM, Microsoft, Apple, Adobe, Amazon, on and on and on. And they have to do that quickly. And they have limited budgets and resources. I mean, they're barely making it, even with all these kickbacks, all this payola. They are barely making it. So they use AI to take bullet sheets, press releases, and websites of the big tech companies and spit out an article on a topic. And then the tech journalist's job really becomes to edit those AI generated articles, post them online, and then make their big tech overlords basically a little bit happier. It's corrupt. It's all corrupt, top to bottom, back to front, stem to stern. And the best thing that I recommend to people is to find tech journalists that you trust, individuals, not big tech news outlets, right? Find individual tech journalists that, whether you agree or disagree with their politics, where you know that they're not in the pockets of big tech. And that includes tech foundations. Because yes, tech foundations do the same stuff I'm talking about here. Many of the same ones that I've covered here on the Lunduke Journal do payola schemes and whining and dining of journalists just like Microsoft, IBM, Red Hat, and many others. So this is not a unique thing just for the proprietary big tech companies. Open source tech foundations do it too. So find the tech journalists that you can actually trust. There's not too many. But thank you to the Lunduke Journal subscribers for making it possible to do this sort of coverage. Truly, I couldn't do this without you. I don't, because of you, because of all of the subscribers out there, I don't have to go with my hat in my hand to IBM and say, please, please, may I have a morsel of meat? There's no payola, there's no bribes, there's no whining and dining. I've had plenty of companies since starting the Lunduke Journal, just in the last year, if you can believe it, that have said, hey, we'd like to fly you out to this event. No, no, not going to do it. That those years are long behind me. I used to be a tech journalist where that got flown all over the place and staying in the fancy hotels, and they tried really hard to buy my coverage, and I'm not having it. I'm not having it anymore. It's been years since I've done that, and I'm not going back to that. I cherish my freedom far too much for that, and I just simply don't want to be a part of that dirty, dirty, corrupt system at all. That's over there. I'll leave all of you to it, and I'll point at you when you do it. But because of all of you supporting the Lunduke Journal directly, no ads. I don't have to put any ads, sponsorships. There's no this episode of the Lunduke Journal is brought to you by Squareflugenflagen, right? None of that is happening here at the Lunduke Journal. And I couldn't do it without you. So go to lunduke.com, click on a bunch of ways to subscribe for free. And if you want to support the Lunduke Journal, either as a monthly, yearly, or lifetime subscriber, it's all up there at lunduke.com. You can get on the Lunduke Journal lifetime subscriber wall if you want to. It's totally optional, but it's totally rad just the same. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tubes, I do declare, end broadcast.